so grateful to welcome Elise Borow to the Project Hope podcast. Elise just recently shared her written survivor story, and this is the first time she will be sharing publicly about her history with trauma, religion, spirituality, and healing. In her own words in her online statement, she says, I quote, "I'm breaking generational curses and speaking out in hopes that just one person finds the strength to face and conquer their own traumas." End quote. There are many ways to listen to her story, but at its essence, you will feel her heart, her faith, and the perseverance of the human spirit. It's possible that this episode may contain triggering content for listeners, so please know that as you proceed. I want to welcome you here and thank you so much for joining the Project Hope podcast. I really feel like our conversation is a real gift for our viewers today. Or I should say our listeners. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to meet with you, and you're just wonderful. So I couldn't think of anyone better to be talking to.
Yay. Well, thanks, Elise. All right. So interestingly enough, we have a few different kind of topics that we're going to touch on today. But to begin things, I was wondering if you would give us kind of a high-level history of your religious or spiritual upbringing, because I think it's this really interesting kind of undercurrent to the whole, to the whole story.
Yeah, so I started off with my parents. There's no religion with them in the home. I went to live with my grandparents at 5 years old, and they are Mormons. So I grew up in California originally. It was a lot more relaxed out there. We moved to Utah, where you have a majority is Mormon, and there's those higher expectations there, you know. So I did grow up Mormon around 14, just going through so much in my life and trying to understand, God, and through this works-based kind of program. And, it never worked or sat well for me. It just kind of heaped more shame to what I was experiencing. And
so you were in it. I mean, it was kind of, you were in the Mormon community.
Yeah, I was doing baptisms for the dead in the temple and had my recommendation and going to church every single Sunday. And I really tried, and I just couldn't hang with it. There's too much on top of what I was, the shame and guilt I already held. And so for me, the easiest way was to just reject it altogether and move on. So for years, that's how it was. When I was about 24, I moved from Utah to Washington. And the people that I met and my neighbors and such, they were very spiritual, and their ideas of spiritual worlds and all that kind of really opened my eyes again, and experiences that were like, okay, maybe there is a spiritual aspect.
Yeah. And you would really kind of let go of that, right? As you were leaving the Mormon community.
Yeah. And, part of that probably is I finally began to find a safe space that I could really search for what my truth is and, who I understood God to be, because back home, it was just this already a form of control that was happening within my family dynamic. And, Mormonism, you don't question it. You go with the flow. And if you question things and ask big questions, you get in trouble, and it's not okay, So I guess that's a big part of it, was moving away, having a safe space to sort of sort those things out. And it definitely was just like a bomb exploded, it was really overwhelming when you've gone from just totally closed off to any possibility, outside of I'm just flesh and bone.
Right. And now at this time, kind of who are you living with? Where are you living? Do you have a support system or?
This is interesting. I have moved out to Washington to go live with my older half brother who had abused me as a child.
Yeah.
And mind you, I was so just out of my mind trauma wise, and everyone just constantly denying almost. They wouldn't talk about whatever happened, and they all maintained a relationship, and it was, I need to forgive him. I need to just live with it. And this is just the way things are, So I went and moved out with him as like a weird attempt to get over the traumas that he had done, which only led to him being further abusive.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's interesting because it also, if the family is not acknowledging it and you've voiced it, then you are in a whole mindset that doesn't acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine in that mindset really wanting to buy into forgiveness and all those principles that seem kind of holy and good, and moving toward him instead of away from him in order to try to fulfill that goodness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So you then meet some people who are kind of into the spiritual, and that's around the time of this move.
Yeah. So I lived with him for a couple months. It became physically violent at one point. And so I took off in my flip-flops and jeans and a jacket in the middle of winter. My grandmother sent me money, which she had sent me $4,000 prior to my brother, and he just kept it. So she got me into a place. I was out after a couple days and then completely on my own in a state where I knew nobody. Had a very toxic brother, a couple miles away. And I'd kind of started to build a new family, and that's where I met, my neighbors, and they just welcomed me with open arms, and they were very, very kind. And it was, I really experienced spiritual things being around them. And that kind of stuck with me of just seeking and searching. And I mean, I've chanted and skipped back and forth at the Hare Krishna temple and talked with friends that are Buddhist and every other, I dove into all of it and sought answers. And it wasn't until a couple years later, I moved back to Utah after a year and with my now ex-husband, and was there a few months before I came to Michigan, and had gotten a random call from one of my friends back in Washington who I never knew to be Christian or anything like that. And, he was like, hey, you need to get right with God. I just felt like I needed to call and tell you that. And I laughed a lot at him. Like, I had a lot of resentment towards the Bible and growing up in Mormonism. And, I had a very skewed idea of Christianity growing up. So I held to that. And I was like, I'm going to call you back after I read the Bible, and I'm going to list to you like all the reasons why your beliefs are wrong. And, don't ever talk to me about this again. And I am now a Christian. Loving Christian on my own.
That's why I was giggling beforehand for our listeners, because I knew the secret to come.
So here I am now. And, it's been coming up on 5.5 years since Christ entered my life, and it's just been growth from there. And that in itself, there's ups and downs and figuring it out. But
so beautiful. Yeah, and I think, you and I kind of discussed this before, but I think it's one of the also kind of extraordinary and beautiful things about your story is with some of these experiences, people have lots of different choices about what to do in terms of their relationship with God or spirit or whatever you want to call it. And I think one of the things that can be really sad in these scenarios where one experiences sort of heavy-handed religiosity is if one leaves it, then sometimes they feel very void of faith entirely. And my belief is that with some of these really rigid or high control, high demand experiences, everybody has to go through their own process, right? When they leave. And sometimes it takes longer, many, many, many years for people to return to something like that or not. But I believe it's always, for me, it creates this kind of hope and faith when people are able to return to the spiritual in a way that's really free, to really go, who am I in this world with this God or spirit or love system that surrounds and holds us, and really getting to explore that for oneself as an adult independently without people saying what is, and really being able to enter into a relationship with spirit, with God. So it's one of the things that strikes me really about you and your story, that you're so obviously filled with that and really relying on that love as a sustenance for your well-being and for living your life.
Yeah, I couldn't make it through without God in my life. I just look back on that time I didn't have him, and it would have been a lot different in kind of how I was handling and coping, and but it's good reflection now, and to really see the difference and change that God has created in my own life. And it's just a testimony itself. I can't deny it. I look and I'm like, there's no way I've been here on my own accord, because this is how I did it the whole time.
Right.
And it was not right. I've definitely had my struggles with dealing with things, and that is why I went to a treatment center. I really acted out, and I handle things a lot differently, and it's just all God's grace and mercy pouring over my life, when I have not deserved it in a lot of instances, but truly saving me and protecting me in times where I should have died in some cases, when
yes.
Yeah. Nice. Other people see that, it's because I just want to yell, God is so good. Look at him. Look at this.
Right. Yes. Right. I know. And yet it's so important that each one comes to that on their own, because otherwise there's something that's in the very, very, very depths of us. There's something that's not totally authentic, right? If we haven't really claimed it as our own. And so then it doesn't have the same presence alive within us. So yeah, thank you. So you kind of queued up our next segue, Elise, that one of the very interesting things about your story also is this component, and is part of the reason why I was reaching out to you, because you attended the New Haven Residential Treatment Center for teens at age 16, I believe.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you would just be open to describing kind of your experience there, and also if you're open to it, kind of that incident that happened when you returned home at one time.
Yeah, absolutely. We can talk. I mean, should we just go dive into it?
Dive on in.
So yeah, I at 16 was sent to New Haven Residential Treatment Center.
Oh, and give us a little story about what was preceding this.
So, as I've shared with you and kind of touched on here, I've been through trauma since the day I came into this world. I have
birthed into trauma.
Yeah, a very abusive, alcoholic father and drug addicted mother, and back and forth, and sexual and physical and emotional and psychological. So there was a lot that was happening. And on top of that, I was sexually molested by my older brother at about age 7, 8, and he's 8 years older than me, so he was old enough to know, but it was something I didn't open up about for a long time. For me, at first, it was our relationship. It was our secret. I was groomed. I was a child. I remember the first time I opened up about it in like 5th grade at Truth or Dare. They were like, "What's your truth?" And it's like, "My brother made me do this to him." And everyone just looked at me in shock, and that was the moment it set in for me, like, this isn't normal. There's something wrong. Yeah. And then it was the shame, because I had already been abandoned by my parents, and I'm with my grandparents at this point for a few years, and I don't want to be abandoned again. I don't want them to see me as broken or wrong. And I have a love for my abuser because I grew up with him. I was groomed by him. So I don't want to ruin his life or get him in trouble.
Yes.
So I held that for a long time. But that was destructive. And on top of that, my parents were very, leave the past in the past. We don't need to rehash it and bring it up. Like, it's just that generation that was kind of the norm, and sweep it under the rug, and don't make the family look bad. Growing up in Mormonism, especially, we lived in like an upper class neighborhood, and image was everything on top of the religious rule.
Yeah,
there. So it was really hard to be able to come forward about those things. And so I was getting into drugs. I was, I first started smoking weed, and then I was drinking a lot, and then I started getting tobacco tickets and getting into trouble. And at the same time, I was being continuously abused in like controlling ways. I was very isolated as a kid. I would be grounded for like months at a time, and never told how I build the trust. When will it come back? It'd be weeks, and I'd be like, I want to go see my friends. I want to go do stuff. And they'd be like, we'll let you know. And it would just go week after week. And, that's one thing we've never really talked about, but it's there. And, I'm okay with it now, but I really recognize that was a big pushing point. So I packed up my car in Utah and drove back to California.
Yeah.
And ran away with my boyfriend at the time for the kicker.
Yep.
Teenage romance. But we ran out there, and we were there a few days. My family had detectives and everyone looking for us. They come from money. They had plenty of resources. I got arrested. Finally, they found us, and I was taken to like a youth home called Casa. I don't know if you're familiar with Casa out there.
I'm not, actually.
So it's just like a kind of youth home they keep kids. I couldn't tell you exactly. I've not like researched the extent of what work they do.
Yeah.
But they kept me there overnight. And so we were like, we'll stay here, we'll eat, and like we'll escape. And so we did. We stayed, we ate, and like during a rec time, ran out the door, jumped the fence, and ready to catch a bus to Texas. And being in Los Alamitos and being white, sitting on a bench, a lady like called the cops. We're like, there's 2 white people here and this is suspicious. And it absolutely was. We were not way. So the cops found us and, I got picked up and had to just sit in custody and wait for my mom and my older brother to fly out and get me in my car.
Yeah.
So I had like a Grand Theft Auto ticket at this point, and I was in a lot of trouble, and they wanted to send me off to a juvenile detention center. And the next resort was, we're going to send her to New Haven, this treatment center for teens. So my parents, they came and got me, zip tied my ankles and my feet together so I couldn't run on like a 9-hour drive. And that's when I blurted it out. My brother tied me, and it triggered that trauma, that memory of, that was kind of part of what he had me do, is I would have to tie him up and I would have to perform oral on him and things like that. And so it was so triggering. I just was like, oh, great. You're tying me up just like you used to make me do. And blurted it out. And like, my mom just sat there in shock, and her friend was with us, and no one said anything though. Like, I got put into the car, we drove back, and they never said a word.
And this was the first time the abuse had been acknowledged.
Yeah. So in their minds, it was like, she's making this up. She's troubled. She doesn't want to be in trouble. We got home the next day, went out, we saw a movie, and it was like my last day being home or whatever. And then, I was taken to New Haven after that. And that's kind of how that whole thing started.
Wow, that is so intense. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that sounds really hard. So then you entered New Haven, and now this is a very interesting chapter. Can you describe the facility a little bit for us?
Yeah, so they're actually just 3 homes. They look like these really large homes. I mean, I walked in the door, it's just this kitchen with like this big farm type table that can sit, 18, 20 people at it, and big kitchen, and the little, just kind of a corner office, almost closet looking, where they would dispense the meds. So that's like, I was sat down in in the basements, you had your therapy rooms. So it would be like kind of like the size of a larger bedroom. And, that's where you would sit and you would meet with your therapist. Each house, I believe it was 2 therapists to a house. And then that was kind of all the girls would go through each one. You had your individual therapy and your family therapy. Then there was the big conference room in the basement, kind of where you would have your house meetings or team meetings, they called it, where all the staff would meet together for the house, and then the therapists, and discuss your treatment plans and all that. And then these glass walls, and it was a bedroom, but it was like a cage, like for an animal. Like, you just were always under constant observation. So that's where I first was put into they take your shoes. I was considered a flight risk. Yeah. And I was the only girl from Utah there, actually. Everyone else was different countries, all over the United States. It was a higher end facility. I mean, my parents were paying $10,000 a month for me to be there. And I was there for 10 months, and the average is about 12 to 14.
Wow. And so you mentioned these sort of glass rooms. Yeah. they all like that, or you were primarily in a room that was all glass, correct?
Yeah, I was the only one. And as new girls would come in, I had a couple roommates because they kept me in there for a couple months
Yeah.
instead of a couple weeks. So I was in there for a while. But yeah, I mean, the kitchen's right there. I mean, everyone can see you, everything that you're doing. Like, you can't just even change in the privacy of your own room. And even going to the bathroom to change, you have to keep the door cracked open. Like, you can't have that, full level of privacy. And so I guess I can understand to an extent why. But, when you're going in there and looking for a safe place, it doesn't feel safe.
That's the key. That really is the key. And that's again what kind of struck me about your story and this experience that you had there. And obviously we'll get into a little bit more around that, but just not, well, one, you're isolated, right? You couldn't make any phone calls.
No, you can't talk to your family for the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
No phone calls, no letters, nothing. You were only to talk with staff. They were putting me on all these meds, things I'd never been on. And then the other rooms were regular bedrooms, though. There was 2 girls to a room, and, down the hall, 3 or so bedrooms on each side. There's a couple bedrooms downstairs. And so the rest was set up more like a normal house. And the higher level girls, because there's 5 levels while you're at your stay of like what you're,
And graduating out to.
Yes, exactly. So the higher level girls had more privacy and downstairs, and you could have a few hours of not having to check in where, safety level in the room, you have to be within arm's length, or other levels, you're checking in every 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, with a staff member.
Yeah. That's an intense regimen. Now, did you feel at all like you bonded with any of the girls or any of the staff members?
I did. There's a few I still talk to.
Nice.
I love them very much. One, she's the one that she started really sharing, and she's my very vocal friend. She's just straightforward. I love it about her. And she just really started addressing things, about New Haven, my experience that stirred that. But I've had a few. I have a couple staff members that I do still talk with.
Yeah.
And have been very validating with my experience, and, privately messaging me, and even publicly, denouncing things that they did, and being like, wow, like, this is wrong. I just never thought of that. So I did get connected with some, and some in very toxic ways,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Were some people who weren't as open to the reality of what you were sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know and again, it's a really interesting element in your story of this, ability to kind of share what this experience was like, because here we've got this circumstance where we're really wanting a nurturing environment for these young women.
Yeah.
And yet it sounds like your experience, at least in the beginning, for sure, it sounds like you really were having this experience of isolation and fear and not feeling safe or trusting.
Yeah. Well, and so they were on, this is the terms, it's so hard to like explain sometimes. I think that's like a big part of the processing everything is,
Yes.
when you put this term to something, it like normalizes it to you. And as I like break apart everything, I'm like, ooh, I hate this word. Like, what it means, it's so dirty. Like, but there's this idea called team. And so everyone in the house had you had school, it was kind of a normal schedule in the morning. You had like an hour or two But I join in while they're on this like house punishment. I can't remember what had happened right before I came, but everyone had to do everything together. And so, like, we're all in this group and like go to each person's room and everyone's getting dressed. And we had like 20 minutes to shower 16 girls, and everyone gets like a minute and a half. And there's screaming and banging on the doors, get out of the shower as soon as you're wet. And like, if you pull anyone behind, like then everyone in the house had to go on comm block, which is like communication block. And no one could talk to each other. You can't talk to staff. Like it becomes very isolating in itself. So it was like, all of this was happening around me. And I was excited to go to New Haven to be away. In my mind, originally, it was like, this is a boarding school. This is great. I can't wait to be away from my family. Like, this is what I wanted. And I got there and it was like, what is happening? Is this real life? Like, everyone's yelling and just really upset and frazzled. And, you know, it was this idea of a team building exercise, but it was really stressful.
That sounds very stressful. Highly stressful. Yeah. So, yeah, I hear like the stress around that whole experience of just, you know, picturing you guys all trying to clamor for the shower, that alone. And then it sounds like that there were elements of like repercussions or punishments if as a group you weren't executing on things the way that you were supposed to.
Yeah. And it's weird because like that wasn't the norm, but like this is where I told you, like where they have these meetings in the basement, these are the things that they make girls do. And sometimes it's individuals, sometimes it's an entire house. If like the whole house is apparently, you know, in chaos. And so it's really like there's just so many different things that would happen. And but it kind of gives the idea of how it was, you know, these just kind of bizarre sometimes treatment plans, what they would call, you know, that they would do. And
yes. Yeah. And I think, I mean, this is why, you know, in terms of what kind of piqued my original curiosity in terms of us speaking, just for people to know and understand that this exists out there, and that sometimes the things that we are sending our children into thinking that they're helpful may not actually be helpful for that individual. And maybe that environment would be helpful for somebody else in a way that it's not helpful for another individual.
Yeah.
So just the significance around people really doing their research, you know, and maybe even speaking to people who have come out of treatment centers like that to really understand what the full experience is.
Yeah.
I mean, you're putting your child in the care and the hands of these individuals and trusting them that what they're doing with your child 24/7, psychologically, physically, medically, that those things can really be trusted. So, and it sounds like your experience was really kind of a mismanagement of you in lots of ways. Well, and that leads us into kind of the story also of the time that you go home.
Yeah. So I had been there about 4 months at this point. I was slowly opening up about things and starting to kind of work on it. You know, everything I had been through that they were trying to pry out of me, you know, but again, I just wasn't feeling that safety there. And so I would really, if I did talk, I was very dissociated, and there was no connection to it. It was just kind of like, this is what I went through. This is what happened. Hi, here I am. And that was like the most I could give.
Yeah.
So I did finally get to go home. And at this point, I was on like 450 milligrams of its trazodone, like a sleeping pill. And that's just so high. That's so much. And so it knocked me out. Like I was out. And I got to back home, my older brother there, of course, still 4 months into actually bringing it up as a family. And I mean, he was never approached, never talked to about any of this, or what he did. But so he was there, my little brother, and then my older brother's best friend at the time. And I mean, since I was like 14, I had a crush on his friend. Like you get older brothers, their friends are cute, they're
Sure.
much older, but like he's a grown man. I mean, at this point, he's, mid-20s, he's married, and he's got his own thing. Like I don't remember if it was right before I turned 17 or right after. That's kind of blurry time-wise for me. But I had taken my pills, and I remember watching Borat. Both of my brothers were in there with us. It was a big wraparound couch, and I'd fallen asleep. And then I eventually, I woke up, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning or so. And, I wake up to him. He's got his hand down my shirt, like breathing really heavy. No idea what happened before that. I was unconscious, and I froze. And I remember just sitting there as he was like very slowly putting his hand in, like, as to not wake me up. And like, I don't know what else he may have done, but my mom actually poked her head out, like, and we were kind of down below the couch. So she just thought I was there alone, sleep, up with the TV on. And she just sleepy was like, oh, you need to go to bed. It's 4 a.m. Why is this TV on still? And like, he jumped up, and like I sat, and I was like, okay, like finally woke up,
Yeah.
He left like in a hurry and kind of jumbling his words, and I was still just frozen and just laid there. And through a lot of the traumas I've been through, I tend to go more into a freeze than a fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
I can't move, I'm like a possum that will just play dead. I'm like, okay, this
Very normal reaction.
And so I went through the rest of my stay. I believe I went back home the next day. I might have been there one more day. But I got back, and I got with my therapist, and I broke down, and I was like, this happened. I didn't want it. I don't understand. Like, I'm already trying to work through these things. And I just opened up. And so, we'd called my family. We told my family about it. And my family did not believe me.
Wow.
And I don't really talk about that in the post so much, I'm happy to share here, but, they didn't believe me. And then staff, especially when you get parents that are saying she's lying, they tend to take that over what you're saying. And they're, one of the staff members I talked to, she's like, you're so hyper focused on not being manipulated by girls. Like, you kind of lose sight of what might be true and what's not, because you don't want to be that staff member that got manipulated by someone. So it's kind of this unhealthy situation for the workers of this expectation in that way, that perpetuates abuse. And it's, the staff members were like, oh, are you sure you didn't want it? Like, you really liked him, and you've always had this crush on him. You obviously wanted it. Like, you need to own up to what, you want and what you did. And it was just this constant pounding of either I'm lying or I really wanted it. And that's from a big Mormon culture too, because they're all from very Mormon households and from Utah, and it's very sheltered, and there's a lot of very naive people. And I don't think everyone was malicious, but again, that doesn't excuse abuse behaviors. And so it was just torture to have, be invalidated and told. a liar.
Elise, that is just, I mean, my heart absolutely breaks for you in that because it's just wrong. It really is just wrong that you are not believed in that scenario, and that it begins with the parents and then moves into the actual therapists, the ones who are there, who should be trained to protect you and work with you and help you to feel safe so that you can open and heal around that. I mean, that is just devastating.
Now here's a word from our sponsor.
I am delighted to offer you Pure Haven products. All proceeds received go right back to the Project Hope podcast. I myself have been using these pure, safe, and toxin-free products for over 4 years, and I absolutely love knowing that my home has countertops that my little niece and nephew can eat off of without worrying that they have a handful of chemicals being placed in their mouths. The cleaning products are some of my favorites. The glass and surface cleaners smell amazing as well. So if this is of interest to you, please go to purehaven.com/Jennifer French. The link is also included below with information about this podcast segment.
Now back to the pod.
Yeah, it was hard, but again, I had my one therapist and he took me to DCFS.
It's so cool. Yes. This is the shining moment of the story, right?
Yeah, this is the first time I'd ever come on top of anything in my life after, abuse-wise and speaking out. And, he kept hammering that in. He's like, this is your time to come up on top. Like, we're going to do this. They scheduled for me in the van and they drove me all the way over to Provo, Utah from Spanish.
Let me just back up for a second so that everyone's tracking this. So you return to the facility. People aren't believing you, but there is this one male therapist who's your therapist who completely believes you and supports you.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what unfolds from there?
So I get sent to DCFS. I sit with a police officer. My mom, I believe she ended up showing up there. I can't remember for sure. But so I sat down with this cop by myself upstairs in this room, and he asked me to tell him what happened, and it just pours out into me like half of what I've been through, like just so much. I just word vomited my whole life experience. And at the end, like all I could say was just like, wow, like this is really odd to ask, but like, can I share your experience with Zach, this man that did this to you? Because he was denying it, of course. Everyone, especially my own parents, are protecting him, Yeah. And I guess whatever this cop said, I have no idea what he said, how it went. But my therapist ended up getting a call that my parents had a few pages of a letter apologizing to them with a confession from Zach, and then one for me. And I believe it was like double-sided. And everyone was just like, wow, so this did happen this way. And, I was finally believed, and they moved forward in the process.
What was that like for you, if I might ask, to actually read that letter? Did you feel a shift from that, or?
I think it was conflicting for a bit. I felt good coming out on top, but the unhealthy part of myself that I was still holding to and living with at the time was, you're ruining his life. You never should have said anything. He's getting a divorce now. Like, that's all your fault. And so it kind of heaped things on just because I'd always lived with that guilt, but it finally felt good to be believed and heard.
Yes.
And I really hoped that was going to be what brought us to address things with my brother.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that never happened, and I don't think it ever will. And I'm at peace with that. It doesn't have to. I own my own story now, and it's, I don't need that. But there was a lot of positive to it, for sure. So I'm eternally grateful for, my therapist at the time and how he handled it. He listened and advocated for me and believed me, and like that's what I needed. And it just makes me wonder, like, you hear so many stories while you're there of like girls reporting abuse, and then it was a lie, and all these things. And I think of each accusation and being raped or molested or beat or abused in some way by a staff member, like how many of those were true? How many girls were just beaten into a submission of just saying, I can't fight anymore? Like, fine, it's a lie. I'll take the gaslighting. I'm just going to take your version of reality and deny my own. And it really breaks my heart, and how girls are still living with that because they're too ashamed or scared to come out because they're afraid they'll just continue to not be believed. And
yes.
It's so unfair and unhealthy. And it's really heartbreaking.
It is. And thank you so much, Elise, for sharing all of this so openly, because it really is like a voice like yours that I think provides so much hope to others, and also really an example of real healing. I mean, I know that you have done a lot of work on yourself, and then it also seems like from what we've talked about that this spiritual element and your spiritual life is also a huge part of your healing. And I know, we talked about this a little before this interview of just kind of this nature of your heart that feels really generous. Mm-hmm. And I really can kind of feel the sort of spirit that you're grounded in when you are able to be in a space right now of understanding that your family just has been unable to come to terms with the abuse of your older brother, and you are able to function and be in relationship with them and have found a place of peace around that, even while knowing that it is really wrong.
Yeah. And I hold that boundary of, I can let them deal with things that they, the way they want to. And it's harder for my grandma. I mean, she's 80 now. So she does have memory slips, and it's hard. And they, it's generational, as we've talked about. It's, abuse goes back into my family with each member, and it's continuous. And it's when it keeps getting passed down, you just have the same unhealthy behaviors. And I don't want to be a part of that portion of things, in my story anymore. And my grandma's still here and still loves me, even speaking out about things. And, it's not to drag anyone through the mud either. I don't need to put people in my story down. Like in the end, for me, it's all about Jesus and how he conquered everything. I'm not a David facing a Goliath. I mean, in a way, but like, when I see that story, it's not about David taking something down that's big. It was Christ taking those things down. And when I handed it over, God's taken care of these things and healed and released and teaching me where to go and how to do that. And that's my focus for me. And, I'm glad some people understand, and that's rocks the boat when you're trying to share these stories. But I just feel so led by God in every way, and how things have played out with you and contacting me. And I mean, oh my gosh, writing that post a million times on Facebook, like it took me a week. I was like, hey everyone, I'll be sharing my story soon. And then like each day kept passing by, and I was like, I don't know if I can do it. Like,
Right.
and I prayed, and I just like had that strength. I was like, okay, like this is it. And I posted it. And like,
Yes.
great.
Yes. And thank you. I know that this episode, along with all of the work that you do around this now and in the future, and your post, of course, that's on Facebook currently, has already been such a blessing to people. And I really do hope that people hear this story and really from you kind of understand that, well, people will take from it what they want, and that's what I love about these interviews and kind of the interview forum, is that people will find what they need to find in this conversation. And so I guess I'll just speak for myself that for me, I think the inspiration for me is really about all that you've been through, which is tremendous, and where you've essentially netted out, where you are present day, and the understanding that you're on a continued journey, but really that you are ready to share and kind of give this story in hopes that somebody else might find hope, inspiration, impetus to change, all those amazing things. And this is what connects us as humans. This is life, and life is not easy. And we all experience abuses and traumas to larger and smaller levels at different times in our life. And so it is an experience that connects us, is this pain, and then also how we each one choose to rise into ourselves around that. And there are so many paths to that. And I personally feel so inspired that yours has continued to be of the spirit, and that you've been able to return to that and really find new life in that way. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elise. One other question that I have for you, I was just thinking about how you're a mom of 3 amazing, gorgeous children.
Thank you.
Twins, and then a singleton.
Yes.
Yeah.
So got a lot of kids, baby train.
So good. And they're how old now?
My daughter is 5, and my boys will be 2, the twins, in November next month. So
yeah,
they're still young. They're little ones.
Yeah. And so I'm always curious, when I get to speak to somebody that has had some exposure or experience similar to what you've had, or different, but different version. How has this kind of, or has it affected or kind of informed you as a mother with children? Like, do you find yourself kind of reflecting on them in new ways because of what you've been through?
Yeah, it's very deep. I have a lot of childhood memories that are blocked out. There's a lot from trauma, it's gone. But I have very, very detailed memories as well that I can recall. I mean, down to every smell, nook and cranny in someone's face, and what people would say to me. Yeah. And so through working through things like recognizing the toxic behaviors that my parents exhibited, like it made me reflect on my own. and how I respond to my 5-year-old. I'm like, I remember being this age and, kinds of feelings. And, how did my parents treat me in ways that I didn't appreciate or make me feel safe and validated? And it's made me have to look at myself and be like, okay, like these things that I'm doing are not healthy.
Yeah.
And it's made me want to be better for them. And I just never want them to experience that. I don't, especially the psychological and emotional. I never want my daughter to feel unheard.
Yeah.
I don't want her to be scared to tell me things and talk to me. I am very open and try to already educate her on, sorry.
No, that's okay.
I try to educate her, on abuse and various forms in kid-friendly ways, of course.
Yes.
There's a lot. It's, there's painful parts, there's beautiful parts, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be a mother. And
Yeah.
I just love them, and the love that's so pure that like I feel I've missed so much is there.
Yeah.
That facilitate that and keep them healthy as possible. Like I feel like I could say a million things and I want to right now.
Yeah, no, that's so beautiful, Elise. It's like spoken from the true heart of a mom, and I think one of the other things that I'm very much appreciating about you and your story is that it's like a good follow-up from what we were saying before, and with the kids, that you really are breaking a cycle. You're breaking a pattern, and it's a generational pattern.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And to even acknowledge it, is then we can begin to heal ourselves and even generations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just that recognition and being willing, because it's painful. Like when you're working through trauma, like, it's everyone's focus is so much on like forgiveness, forgive your abuser, forgive these things. But like, there's a point where you reflect on yourself in ways that you've made decisions and recognizing, ways that you've tried to protect yourself with unhealthy ways, like because you're in survival mode. You were trying to survive, and you don't need to survive with healthy people.
Yeah.
And so it was learning to have healthy boundaries and healthy responses to people and balancing that out and being more graceful towards myself as much as I am with other people, and just acknowledging, what, if I can't say where my struggles are in my life, like how can I be an example to my kids of like, we need to grow and be better together. And
yes. So beautiful. Thank you so much, Elise. I've so enjoyed being with you and speaking to you and receiving your story. It's amazing. And you're in such an incredible place. And also, I totally leave room for there's always more, and we're a constant work in progress. But it's an absolute pleasure, and you're a beautiful person and beautiful mama.
Thank you. And I thank you for having me and hearing my story. It means a lot to have people be willing to just listen and be open to what's being said, and help other people find the strength to come out, because you do that yourself. And, I'm very grateful for that. And the people that you're seeking out to get this done, that you're going to reach so many people in so many aspects. It's beautiful. You're paving a way to healing and joy and self-forgiveness and empowerment. I love it. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you for holding that with me. I'm sure that many of you are inspired by Elise and her story. She brings to light a number of very important things for us to consider. So firstly, I just want to say for the parents or caregivers out there, what a cautionary tale this is when choosing to send a teen to a treatment center away from home. It's natural to give power over to institutions that should know how to help your child. However, what we see in Elise's story is that it's not always the case that a place designed for healing is in fact executing on that promise. In the era of the Me Too movement, thank God, victim blaming, its prevalence, its dismissiveness, and the psychological understanding around why people go there has really come to the forefront. Contained in Elise's story is the devastation of not being believed by family and mental health staff at the New Haven Treatment Center, and then receiving the support of her therapist, who was at the same center, and the police force, which resulted in a formal apology. Everyone who is a recipient of abuse, whether it's sexual, physical, emotional, will process it in their own way. They will need to speak certain things and not others, do certain things and not others. And in this way, in my opinion, we give people the freedom to discover and be and heal as only they would, therefore creating, becoming, and being themselves. Elise, you're a beautiful example of this. So as with any therapist, counselor, or healing program, please do your research. Speak to people who have been through that program. This is often an excellent litmus test. And remember, there are always other options that provide similar results. There's never one recipe that works for everyone. We become rigid and blind to answers if our hearts aren't open to possibilities. I commend Elise for her bravery in sharing her story and for being true to herself as she continues this journey of life. I think I can speak for others that we thank you so very much, Elise.